Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Beit Midrash. Glad to have y'all back. Glad to be learning with y'all, and glad to be back after I was gone for a couple of weeks. So good to have the crew back together. Um, we're going to go ahead. I believe we are on. We because we did miss a couple weeks. We're slightly behind, and I promised we wouldn't have too many more double Parsha sessions, but I realized we're going to have it today, and we're going to have at least one more because we do have some double Parshiot that we read as double Parshiot in the Torah. So we'll have to cover those simultaneously to keep on track, but we'll get there in a couple of weeks. We're not there yet. Um, We'll start instead with two parshiots that are often combined, but in a leap year such as this one, they are not, which is Hukat, Parshat Hukat, and Parshat Balak. Um, and as always, as shouldn't say as always, but as we have been doing, following Rabbi Sacks's commentary on the Parsha. So we'll begin with Parshat Hukat first. About where he talks a lot about the red heifer, the para aduma, um, the one of the great hukot of the Torah. So before I jump in, anybody have any thoughts, comments, reactions to Rabbi Sacks's commentary?
Well, I don't know if Barbara is usually the person who first starts to talk. Let me just mention that.
She counts to 15 just to give other people a chance. So.
Okay, I counted to 10, so I'm ready. This is a complicated discussion of what part of your brain you're using for daily work. But the thing that caught my eye, so on the very first page, 2015, he talked about when someone gets in close proximity to a dead body, that's a primary source of impurity and they need to be cleansed. That immediately, since I'm part of the Hevra Kadisha group, that immediately made me wonder. I mean, we do not, in the Hevra Kadisha, we do not have a purification process of any sort after we do our work. And so I didn't know when that whole deal changed where you don't have to officially purify yourself.
Excellent question. So, look, they talk about it a little. He talks about it a little bit here that the red heifer, which whose ashes are used to purify those who become ritually impure, could only be sacrificed when the temple's stood. Without a temple, you can't do it. There's some other rabbinic concepts around, that pretty much any land outside of the land of Israel is ritually impure anyway. So at some point, as we were dispersed, as we didn't really have a way to rectify this, the ritual impurity kind of by and large fell by the wayside. Outside of the Orthodox holding a couple remnants, such as Nidah, for example, menstruation, most ritual impurity law has kind of been like, oh, let's just assume everybody's always ritually impure and go on with our lives. That's kind of how it functions kind of practically. In terms of Chevra Kadisha, what I would say is, I'd probably recommend doing something similar to what we have at the synagogue, which is, after you come back to the synagogue after a funeral, you at least do like a washing of the hands, which is at least a symbolic ritual purification. So something along that line that you might have outside of the room where the body you're preparing is, having maybe a table with a bowl and a hand washing cup so you can at least like symbolically wash your hands and symbolically purify yourself on the way out, or have it right outside the funeral home, one of the two.
Well, thank you. I'll mention that to the group because we don't do anything like that.
Yeah, I can mention that
the whole process. It's a very formal process, the way that we do it, all the steps that we go through, but that just hasn't been one of the steps. Thank you.
Yeah. I can also try to mention it to Abe. Other thoughts, comments?
Well, I apparently read the wrong thing. Well, I read one chapter, that chapter, but I read the chapter before. We already done that, the first populist
Yeah,
Korah.
I think so I will say briefly, we did talk about it a little bit last week. I thought it was a fantastic chapter. So if you haven't read it, I recommend reading it on Parshat, it was Korah, right? But I think we did move on to Chukat and Balak.
Well, I started counting again, but I just want to make the point that both Korah and Hukat, poor old Rabbi Sacks misses the geology parts. So that, of course, is terribly upsetting to me, but it doesn't make me throw my book down. But it's interesting to me that the earthquake in Korah and the Moses striking the stone are parts that, as you have worked so hard to teach me before, Rabbi Sacks doesn't have to talk about the parts every single word. He only has 3 pages or 4 pages. He can pick something to talk about. So in Hukat, he misses talking about the people being very upset after Miriam's death when they lost their water source and didn't have, or the people, their animals, etc., didn't have water, and they go complaining again to Moses, who gets all upset about it and is told to go get water from a stone. And that's a very interesting issue in Israel, to get water from a stone, because as we know here in Alabama, there's a lot of water underneath the surface of the earth. We have water tables that are pretty high. We had rain this summer, which replenishes the water in the aquifers, but that's not true in Israel. And in Israel, they use water.
That they're not in Israel.
Oh, excuse me. In the wilderness of that arid part of the world. Okay. Yeah, you would have marked that wrong on the test. I know. In that part of the world, modern day Israel is using a tremendous amount of water from below the surface of the earth. And it's only in the last 4 or 5 years, the numbers that I know are from 2022, 88% of Israel's drinking water now comes from desalination and reworked water. But yeah, they have to get water from stones, and that's still a significant part of it. I think most of the world is getting about 50% of its water from aquifers. And we do that in the United States. But you can get water from a stone. So that part isn't just God's magic. That part actually works.
Barbara, how do you get water from a stone?
How do you get water from a stone? I wish I had a coaster with me. We have sandstone koshers. There's space between the little grains, and the coasters work because the condensation on the outside of your glass seeps into the stone. What you have to do to get water back out from a stone is have pores that are connected. So you have permeability, and the water can flow or the water can be extracted from the stone. When the water goes into the sandstone coaster, you just let it evaporate back out. But we have wells and we have public water systems that use groundwater. And when it's a dry season, the level of the groundwater goes down, when it certainly goes down around a cone of depression, around the actual pipe of the well. But the water tables in our area are much nicer and much more have a greater amount of water in them than do the water in arid countries or in the western US. Most of the water west of the Mississippi is in aquifers.
So
That
I want
answers
to, I'll say three things. I say, like, yes, scientifically, geologically, yes, there are ways to get water out of certain kinds of rocks. I'm sure there are some kinds of rocks that don't absorb water nearly as well as others, but that's going to be Barbara will know that much better than I do. Secondly, I think I would argue that the Torah probably knew realistically that there were ways and types of rock that you could get water from. I think they were aware of that as having a history as a nomadic people, of having ways, knowing how to identify rocks that they might be able to get water from. And this is, I don't think that was the point of what they were the Torah is trying to tell us. I think the point the Torah is trying to tell us in that story is specifically Moses isn't supposed to strike the rock to get the water. Moses is supposed to talk to the rock. And I don't know, I'm pretty confident no matter how nicely you talk to a rock that has a lot of water in it, water's not going to come out. Right, Barbara? I will refer this to you.
I will agree with you on that. As you said, there are plenty of rocks that don't contain water, that are unable to contain water. And the other problem is that rocks cannot release that water unless those water containers are connected. So the rock not only has to have porosity so that the water can be there, and that can happen when the rock is formed initially, if we're talking about igneous rocks that come from when you have the steam coming out of the volcano, that can get trapped in the rocks as they solidify. But if there's not permeability, if those rocks aren't full of cracks and connections, then you can never get the water out. And as far as I know, just talking to the rock doesn't work, because if it did, we wouldn't have to have fracking and all those problems.
So I think that's actually where the point of that story is supposed to be, is that the whole idea is not, the miracle is not supposed to be that they got water from a rock. Moses has done that already. He did that all the way back in Exodus. There's supposed to be a miraculous element to this story that Moses bypasses and doesn't do. If you really want, you can hear my comments on this on last week. If you check the live stream, I talked about this a little bit, about what Moses actually did wrong. But I do want to kind of come back to Rabbi Sacks and his commentary on Chok and Chukim and these kind of non-rational laws that we have in the Torah. Yes, Margaret?
Well, I have two things to say. One was that I thought it was very interesting here that Moses is instructed to use speech. God spoke the world into existence, and the idea of the use of speech as the productive use of speech, the miraculous use of speech, is interesting to me. And
abracadabra.
Exactly. And secondly, I wanted to get back to the idea that you're supposed to do things, that having something that doesn't make any sense kind of bypasses the rational mind and gets into the, we could call it the subconscious in some instances, as well as to the bypassing the frontal lobes. That I've not, it's my lack of education, but I've never ever heard of what the rationale is for having these particular laws. But there's also, there are also techniques in therapy where we're each riding our own hobby horses here, but where being irrational gets past blockages and gets to people's unconscious. So I thought that was all very interesting.
Yeah, I read a book probably about 2 years ago now, called The Righteous Mind. Has anybody else read that? By Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. I will say it's a lot of social science. So if you don't mind reading social science literature, it's probably fine. But he makes essentially this same argument that Rabbi Sacks is making. He argues that when we make moral, ethical decisions, we very rarely actually do it rationally. And what we do it emotionally, and then we go back and rationalize the reason why we did it. So the metaphor he likes to use is there's a rider riding an elephant. The elephant is our emotional response. The rider is our rational response. So, I imagine, I've never actually done it, but I imagine trying to steer an elephant is really difficult to do. So what happens? The elephant chooses where you go, and the rider says, okay, we're going in this direction. Now we have to figure out why we're going in this direction. And he brings in a decent amount of, social science research. I'm deliberately using social science because I don't remember how much of it was sociologists and psychologists and anthropologists and etc. So I'm intentionally being vague because I don't remember. But there is a level of that there that is, and Margaret, you might be able to talk better how much you know of that being true or not. But it seems to fit similarly to what Rabbi Sacks is saying, is sometimes it's the emotional part that we need to connect to, and then we rationalize afterwards why we actually did what we did. And what the step that Rabbi Sacks takes, which I thought was fascinating, is the laws are intentionally not supposed to be entirely rational, but that the Torah interweaves emotion into it and narrative so that we have an emotional response to the law. And that way we're following the law because we have an emotional connection to it, not because it entirely rationally makes sense. Which is kind of what he argues on 218, is a moral system to be adequate to the human condition must recognize the nature of the human condition. The Torah does something no other law code does in anything like the same degree. It interweaves narrative and law. The laws that follow the Exodus, based for the most part on creating a just and equitable society, are not mere laws. They are the culmination of the story and the resolution of the emotions it aroused. So all these things, you're right, like not having a cheeseburger doesn't make rational sense unless it's connected to a narrative that we are holding on to, and that this is part of the narrative that we're holding on to. And it doesn't have to make sense. It just has to, we just have to emotionally connect with it to follow.
Well, I like your discussion, Rabbi. What I didn't like in terms of what was written here was that when they were looking for 3 different explanations for the Hukim, one of them was by Yochanan ben Zakkai, who basically said, God said it. I know you don't understand it. Do it. I mean, really, I don't accept that method of understanding. It doesn't deepen my ability to become more spiritual.
So that's why he gives two other explanations.
Yeah, but depending on whether you're Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox, or something else, you might choose one of these. I just don't like the one where you just blind faith. You do what you
I
feel
don't
like.
either, so I'm with you. Yes, Barbara.
I apologize. I'm new, Barbara. Hi, another Barbara. And I just ordered the book, so I haven't read what y'all have read, but I was at the JCC for the Honor Our Parents Shabbat a week ago, or whenever this was the Torah portion, and Rabbi Yossi Friedman was speaking. And I thought the example he gave was so powerful, and it's about doing it just because I said so. But he likens our relationship with God like a marriage, which I think makes sense to many of us, and talked about if a husband and wife, and the wife's had a hard day and she's sitting on the couch and she asks for a glass of water, and the husband thinks, yeah, water's good for you. I'll bring you a glass of water. Here's your glass of water, honey. And then if another time she asked for a Diet Coke and he thought, well, no, you don't need a Diet Coke. Diet Coke's not good for you. I'm not going to bring you a Diet Coke. So he was sort of saying that even if the idea is to do the thing not because it makes sense, but because you love the person asking you to do it. And that was just an analogy that I could really understand.
Yeah, I usually tell I usually tell a similar but slightly different story around that. Yes. It comes to the same conclusion. You do it because you love your spouse, not because there's any rational reason to be doing it.
Yep. Right. But isn't that what isn't that what the logic was for what Stuart was talking about? That just do it because that's the way it's written?
Yeah, I think the one difference, and I think the one part that I think Stuart might be responding to, is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in his argument doesn't take the love into account. The quote is, "By your life, the dead body does not defile, and the waters of the red heifer do not purify. Rather, God says, I have ordained a decree, I have issued a statute, and you have no permission to transgress my decree." That's a much more authoritarian form than we're doing it out of love and we're doing it because we care. So I think that's a little more what Stuart's responding to, is like this idea of like, I told you to do it, do it. Like, I don't care if you understand it, just do it. Whereas versus, I don't understand why I'm doing it, but I'll do it because I love it.
Yeah, I guess it works better when God is the wife instead of the husband.
All right.
Well, that's why God's always right. So Eddie, did you have something you were going to say?
Yeah, this is a question I've been asked more than once by non-Jews, is why we follow some of these Hakim. And my answer to them, as straightforward as it can be, is because God commanded it, and that's enough for me. I don't have to have a rational answer behind that. And when we think about the narrative, I think faith is based on that narrative, and we accept it or we don't accept it.
So look, I think there's a level at which, and this is maybe a little bit of my view, is there's a level at which we do it because we do it and because we're asked to do it. Fine. But I don't think that's enough, that just being told to do it, particularly for anybody my age and younger, that's not enough reason to do so. My generation and younger are very kind of anti-authority in that way. Some people might not be, but Margaret looked a little shocked. But
I think she's saying so are we.
Having lived through the 60s, I would say.
Okay, fair. I'll put it this way. I don't want to speak on behalf of others who are older than me, because I wasn't there. those younger than me, I feel like I've witnessed enough, I can say. So, but yes, there's an anti-authority stream, I think, for many of us, that doing it because God said so is not enough. So then you have to come to either a rational explanation, which Rabbi Sacks gives a couple really good ones, like Maimonides of, this probably had an original reason why God prohibited it, that it was anti-idolatry, anti some other group that was doing this, and that the Torah is speaking against their idolatry that they were doing. It's just, we don't know that anymore because the context has been lost. Rationally and scientifically, that's pretty good. Nachmanides, that the chukim are laws to teach the integrity of nature, and that it's supposed to help us differentiate and not intermingle things that are supposed to naturally be kept separated. Okay, pretty good. And you can fit a lot of these chukim into that box as well. So you either need to come up with a better reason, or kind of what Barbara and I were just saying, is that you come to it out of a place of love. I don't understand it. I don't need to understand it. I do it because I love you, and I'll do it because you asked me to, because of my love for you. And that ties in a little bit with what he's saying about emotion also. That if you bring in the love and the emotion into it, then you don't that kind of short circuits the rational, and you don't need to worry about the rational. You're just doing it because of the emotion.
Do you think we are not teaching the younger generation enough of the emotional part, enough of the narrative, and they're only picking up the law, the law, the law?
I will say, so on the first point, yes. I don't think we're teaching the emotion nearly enough. And I think the struggle, and this is part of the struggle, is you can't really teach emotion. You can't teach somebody to love. You can't teach somebody to fear. You have to experience it. You can't just tell people to do it.
No, but that's where you model things.
You have to elicit it in some
Yes.
sense, and you can't just
So to that point, yes. Now, are we teaching enough narrative? Yeah. Are we teaching enough law? Debate them. Is a lot of our religious school education what educators derogatorily call bar mitzvah factories? Yes. Like, we're teaching to the test. And we're trying to get kids ready for their bar and bat mitzvah, and make sure that they can know enough Hebrew to read from the Torah, know the basic service, be able to participate, and then what? And I don't think we're doing a good job of after that.
But I mean, maybe we should be teaching that Judaism is really not as interesting until you become an adult and can talk about it like this. This is the interesting part. And when you're young, that's not gonna, you gotta have some life experience to enjoy this.
Maybe. I like to think that Judaism has a lot to teach to our youngsters, and has a lot to teach that applies to their lives as well. There's a great book, it's not super new anymore. There's a great book that Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin edited, called Text Messages, which is basically divrei Torah that are no more than like 2 pages. And it's all designed for teens, knowing that teens won't read anything more than 2 pages at a time. Just joking. My teens read a lot more. But, the idea that it's short, it's quick, and it gets to the point of teaching them something valuable about being a teenager. I think that we can do that for kids. We just need, I don't think we are doing it effectively. to Barbara's question. Before we get too far down the line, I do want to get to Parshat Balak and make sure we have enough time to talk about Parshat Balak that and Rabbi Sacks' commentary on that. A people that dwells alone, which I found kind of fascinating, and I thought was pretty powerful. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I think Rabbi Sacks is on a roll, like between the Korach, Shalach, and Balak. I'm like, he's on a roll. He was on a roll writing these, but maybe it's just me. But comments, thoughts on Parshat Balak and his commentary on the people that dwells alone. Barbara's counting to 15.
I found the chapter fascinating, and I have not been able to process his conclusion. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. I don't know what he's saying. So,
anybody else have the same? So the conclusion is, in our uniqueness lies our universality. By being what only we are, we contribute to humanity what only we can give.
So this is a very strong part of the Torah talking about anti-Semitism, basically. Before we discuss it, are there other areas, are there other parsha that are as direct about giving us an understanding of what causes anti-Semitism?
I'd have to think about it. I would say the first chapter of Exodus gives a pretty clear anti-Semitic blueprint. What happens? Pharaoh says there's a people that live among us that are too numerous for us, and if there's a war to break out, they might join against our enemy. So therefore, let's do something about it. That's been parroted periodically throughout history, almost word for word in some cases. And in some cases, I don't think they know they're doing it word for word, but they're doing it anyway. That argument was, during the 1800s Enlightenment, that was the whole argument against giving Jews citizenship to these newborn nations, was because are they actually going to be loyal to the nation, or are they only going to be loyal to their fellow Jews?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Haman's argument against it is a great anti-Semitic one too, is that there's a people, they're different than us, they don't follow our laws, they don't act like we do, we should do something about it. Again, that's parroted throughout history also. Whether there's so much more in the Torah, I'd have to kind of sit back and think. I'm sure there are things about anti-Semitism we could read back into it and lessons we can learn. I'm not sure it's Amalek is another one that kind of, fights indiscriminately against us for no particular reason.
So, I mean, here in today's world, where I think I would speak for most people, most Jews, to say it feels like there's more anti-Semitism bubbling up than we've had in the recent past, at least after the Holocaust. But it's one thing is assimilation is no cure for anti-Semitism. So if here we are facing anti-Semitism, so you can say to yourself, well, should I just go to Israel? I'll be where my friends and neighbors all accept me. Should I become Christian or some other religion and the ultimate assimilation? Or should I keep the uniqueness that I am, that Jews are within this society? And I guess I would say that the Parsha argues that you should keep your uniqueness and stay where you are and fight things from within rather than from without.
Well, that's, I think, a lot of what Rabbi Sacks is arguing, is what's unique about us is the fact that we have a lot to teach. But if we try to be like everyone else, we're never going to be like anyone else. That we have Judaism has a lot to share, has a lot to teach other people. They might not want to learn it, but that's not necessarily an us problem. But that the more we try to minimize who we are and what we stand for and try to be like everyone else, the less we're actually able to do what we're actually supposed to be doing, and the less anybody will actually listen to us.
I found in reading this that I couldn't not think of politics 2024. It just was impossible to not think of it, because Sacks goes through the suggestion that people's anti-Semitism rises when they're already in a crisis themselves. And so
he made that argument in a Korah too, but yes.
Yeah. And when people are already upset, then they're looking for who did this to me, not necessarily what can I do differently to get out of this situation. And so because of their differences from the Jewish people, whether that was a religious difference back when the root of anti-Semitism was in the Christianity, or whether it was the pre-Holocaust stuff where it's eugenics, that, you know, Jews are the bad guy because they're different from us, or you go to, I don't know, maybe I'm trying to think for today, is it Jews are different? Why should they have Israel? Why should they have their own country? Why shouldn't I? And that's why we're going to make America great again, because we're going to go back to it all being waspy. And you can take that off the edit that out of the recording.
I don't know how to do that, so I can't do that. But
Plus,
watch yourself.
plus they're going to lecture to Jews as to how to be Jews.
That's right.
But I think there's, you know, if you look at some of the anti-Semitism that's going around, it's fascinating in that it's coming from both directions. On one side, it's you're not like us, you're different. It's the Haman argument. You're not like us, you're different, you don't follow our laws, you're not Christian, and therefore you're wrong and need to be eliminated. But if you look at it at the other side, it's you're too much like us, you think that you're like us, but you're really different, and you know, you tried to be like us, but you're not. So, you know, it's this weird place of, and I think Rabbi Sacks points this out too, is that on one hand, we're criticized for being different and we're criticized for being too similar. And so we really can't win in that argument. Which is why, you know, this is why Herzl, and I'm trying to find Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin come to this agreement that we need a Jewish state, because otherwise we're eternally going to be stuck in the state of we can't actually win. And of course, now that Israel's being attacked for the same exact things, you know, it's too cosmopolitan, it's too wealthy, it's too European, and it's too colonialist, it's too regressive. Like, you know, it's being called both socialist and Naziist, but it's also, you know, the most progressive society in the Middle East by far. It's a very odd dichotomy that I think Rabbi Sacks is trying to point out, that we are a people who dwell alone. Nobody else has this problem. No other people are pigeonholed in the way that we are. And so he says, we got to stop fighting. Like, do we have to stand up for anti-Semitism or stand up against anti-Semitism? Yes. Do we have a responsibility to call out when it's there? Yes. He also says it's not our fight, that, that's like it's kind of like telling African Americans it's their job to end racism, right? Or it's women's job to end sexism. It's not, you can't blame the victim for it. So what do? We just have to embrace this messiness of where we are and embrace the fact that we're unique, embrace the fact that we have things to teach, embrace who we are as a people, and move forward. And acknowledge the fact that we're never going to be on either side altogether. And I think that's where that's where his conclusion comes in the end, is our uniqueness lies in our universality. We believe in a future in which all people are accepted equally. We believe in a future of all people should be treated equally. But let's embrace who we are and stop trying to be like other people.
How then do you deal with anti-Semitism, but when it crosses the line into anti-Zionism, what's the path for Israel to deal with that?
Yeah, it's interesting in that I think Israel is trying to take that tack of saying, we don't really care what you think. We're going to be who we are, and we're going to be proud of who we are, and we're going to do the best that we can as who we are. Do they have problems? Yeah, every country has problems. At 76 years old, America was in civil war and fell apart. Right about that same age, give or take. Actually, I think America was a little younger. Within 76 years, the United States of America almost collapsed altogether. I think Israel's tried to take Rabbi Sacks's tact of saying, we don't really care what you think. We're going to be us. We're going to do what we believe is the right thing to do. And sorry if you don't like it. And not everybody's going to like it. And, whether it's anti-Zionism or anti-Israel or anti-Semitism, I should say, it's a fine line. And it's sometimes hard to differentiate without, digging in to find out what they're actually saying. Not everything that's anti-Zionist is anti-Semitic. A lot of it right now is, but not all.
And is the proper thing, we have a military response and we don't care what you think?
So that's getting into a critique of the Israeli government, which, is perfectly valid to do. You can sit here and critique whether or not you agree with how Israel has gone forward with their war in Gaza. That's a perfectly fine critique if you can do it with some evidence and some logic and some research. Although the stipulation I always put is, what's your suggestion for a better alternative? You have a better alternative, I would love to hear it. But I personally, I don't know if I do. I'm also not a military strategist, so it's really, I'm not really, I stay out of that a little bit.
I think saying we don't care what you think sounds a little stronger than, it's kind of the difference between the love and the authoritarianism. It's really more, we can't win trying to please you because there's no clear path where you love us. So we're going to ignore that, and we're going to take our own ethics and try to figure out what the right thing to do is. Not, we don't care what you think, but we have to do what we think is right, and we can't really factor in because everything we try to do just backfires on us.
A fair criticism of my statement.
Well, it was Barbara's response to your statement that I was trying to unwind.
I may have gone a little, yeah. Israelis are a little bit on the blunt side. So, I mean, they very well might say, we don't really care. But, that's fair that they don't care because they know they're not going to win no matter what they do. So it's kind of, we're going to do what we think is best because that's what we need to do to protect our people. And I'm sorry if you don't like it, but unless you have a better suggestion, then, let us do what we're going to do.
I think that what troubled me in Sacks's conclusion is the part about we have something to teach other people. While on the one hand, I personally embrace many, if not all, Jewish values. On the other hand, I think there is some kind of, can't think of the word that I want to use, but
arrogance.
That's the word.
So I'll say two things in response. One is Rabbi Sacks. He says on 227, Jews have always been the irritant of empires because of our insistence on the dignity of the individual and his or her liberty. Anti-Semitism is either the last gasp of a declining culture or the first warning sign of a new totalitarianism. By being different, we teach the world the dignity of difference. Empires seek to impose unity on a plural world. Jews know that unity exists in heaven. God creates diversity on earth. This is a message that not everybody recites. And so, this kind of leads into the second thing, which Brad Artson likes to say, is that we have something to teach other people. That doesn't mean we don't have things to learn from other people. Right? The fact that we have something to teach other people and other cultures and other religions doesn't diminish them. It just means that we have something that they can learn from us, and they have things that we can learn from them also. It doesn't say, it doesn't say that we're superior than them because we have something to teach. It just means we have something unique that we can share that other people should be able to learn from us. That would help make the world a better place. That doesn't diminish them. It just means that there's something that they can learn. Does that help a little?
I think, yes, I think you put it, that's not exactly what Sacks says, but I think that your way of speaking about it certainly makes it more appropriate.
It would be kind of nice if, in this chapter, Rabbi Sacks gave us a blueprint of how to fight anti-Semitism and to eradicate it. He doesn't, but as I've said a couple of times, we've been trying to eradicate anti-Semitism for 2,000 years, and we're still fighting it. So I'm not sure he has an answer. He says we must join with others to fight anti-Semitism and every other religious or racial hate. But great, we just don't know how to do it is the problem. And maybe the part of the problem is it's not really our fight. As he also says, Jews cannot cure anti-Semitism, only anti-Semites can do that. So, there's no magic bullet. It's just, we still have to call it out. We still have to fight it. We still have to acknowledge it. We have to work on it. It's just we're not going to be able to do it as a Jewish people. As I said, any more than African Americans can stop racism on their own, or women can stop sexism on their own.
But so let me just ask you this. I mean, we're reading this. This is a good discussion, a good dissection of the information. But, when we get away from this and today, later today and tomorrow, when you think about anti-Semitism, it seems irrational to me. It doesn't really, I don't really in my gut understand it. And so I'm happy to read all these things, but when I get away from it, I say, I don't understand it. I just don't understand why people hate Jews. I don't understand it.
But do you understand racism? I mean, it is irrational.
I think it's the same.
It's just, I'm going to build myself up by hating someone else and I pick you. I mean, that's the way
I'll let Margaret chime in a moment. I'll just say, I just want to add that this is going back to the first half of our class, right? That there's something emotional that's driving it. And whether it's shame, whether it's hurt, whether it's blame, whether it's disappointment or grief or anger or all sorts of things. And what do? Well, we choose somebody and then we rationalize why we're choosing. But go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a form of scapegoating, and and it just becomes sort of habitual over the centuries.
But somehow it's always the Jews. It's always against the Jews.
Why choose another scapegoat when you've got a perfectly good one right at hand?
We're perfect in that way, right?
But that would make you have to think.
So look, it's not always, it's consistently Jews. It's not always Jews, right? Like we're in Birmingham, Alabama. It was blacks for a long time. After 9/11, it was Muslims for years after 9/11. There's always somebody different, and there's always somebody that's going to when things aren't going well and you want to blame it on somebody, there's always somebody to blame that's different than you, so that you don't have to take the responsibility for yourself. But maybe that's part of Sacks's point too, is that Jews don't believe that we're really all that different. Every person is created in the image of God, whether or not they're Jewish. So there's something that unifies us and ties us together. And that's not a message everybody wants to hear. So until the time when they're ready to hear it, we'll keep holding to it, we'll keep clinging to it, and we'll keep reciting it, and God willing, at some point, people will hear it. Yes, TK.
I just wrote a piece that kind of ties some of this. And one of the things that I was talking about in a recent blog was the very fact that Sacks is talking about the limbic brain and the rational brain. That happened in a certain order. The limbic brain came first. And so it is the elephant. I love that description. Thank you. So the elephant is guiding us, and it's guiding us, if I can mix metaphors, like an iceberg. We don't, our elephant is underwater for the most part, with maybe a tiny little bit exposed. And so we lose complete a sense of how young we are in evolutionary terms. We are infants. The evolutionary clock of the earth, we appear in the last second of midnight, and that's our limbic brain. That doesn't even count the rational brain that's sitting up here. So my hope is that we are still evolving, and that hopefully the rational brain will prove to increase our survival, and therefore we will start incorporating that more and more. But right now we're not there. We're young and we're irrational. And to me, that explains a whole lot of things that are going on. And if you look back in terms of why did we even develop a rational brain? Well, and why do we even have the emotional elephant there? And it's all about survival. So there are really good reasons why we have this innate binding to tribal family, binding together. It increases our survival if we do that. And so to me, that's why, I always say that if you really want the human race to be unified together, and the only way to do it is to have an alien invasion, because they're really different and really scary.
We don't know because we haven't met them yet. But
yeah, I mean, they aren't, but they could be, and that would, what was that movie? The Independence Day. The whole world came together all of a sudden. It was beautiful. 911. A large part of the world came together. People who may have hated us were supporting us for that moment in time. But then it goes away because we forget and we're immature and young. That's what I want to say.
I would say we have such a strong group of thinkers. You're one of them, but also Barbara Ayland. I enjoyed listening to you for the first time, so I hope you'll come back whenever you have a chance.
Yes.
Thank you, Stuart. I feel very welcome to Temple Bethel. Thank you.
Good.
thank y'all very much. Kol hakavod to all y'all. Looking forward to learning with you next week. One parsha next week. The singular most read parsha, the parsha we read most frequently in the entire Torah, Parsha Pinchas. So we'll discuss what Rabbi Sacks has to say about it next week. I don't even know. I'm going to be in suspense. I want to find out. Hope everybody has a good week. Stay well, be well, and looking forward to learning with y'all again soon.
Thank you, Rabbi.
If I don't see you before then, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.